Hi everyone, it's Dawn here. I'm here today to show you how to work the floret clusters in assigned pooling for the float shawl, and then also it's the same exact pattern for the calico shawl as well. I've had a lot of questions about how to perform these little clusters, so I just wanted to go over some of the basics with you and show you how it's done. So the first thing you need is a skein of yarn that will work with assigned pooling, and what you want to look for is color repeats that run about 1/4 to 1/2, no more than a half. I'd say probably a third would be even better, of the entire length of the hank of yarn when you have it spread out before you even have it wound into a cake. So what you want to do first, once you do have it wound, is lay out your yarn and just look at the color changes and see. Here we have some nice bright pink, and then it kind of fades to a lighter pink, and it transitions into this gray blue, and that gray blue is going to be the background color, and it's going to be the predominant color that runs through most of the length. And then here we see we're transitioning back into the lighter pink and then into the hot pink again. So that's one color repeat. We started with the hot pink and we made it back to the hot pink. For assigned pooling, it's not necessary to measure the distance between or anything like that, like it is for when you're working in controlled pooling. That's completely different. This is a lot more flexible and a lot easier because you're really letting the color repeats in the yarn, in your individual skein of yarn, determine where the texture falls. So now that you know what your transitions look like, you're going to decide about where you're going to start your texture pattern. So basically you want to decide what that division is going to be for you within your skein. Some skeins might have more colors, and you would have a background color and maybe a kind of a primary accent color, and then another section of kind of a smaller secondary accent color. You just need to determine ahead of time what you want to do for your project and how you want those colors to be assigned. So we've assigned our background stitch, which in this case is stockinette, to the blue-gray, and we've assigned our floret cluster stitch to the pink section. All right, so that's the first thing you need to do to get started. Next, it would be good to cast on maybe 20 or 30 stitches and just practice and decide how each floret cluster is going to be made with your specific gauge and with your specific yarn that you have, because it will be different for each person and with each individual skein. But what we're going to do to go ahead and get started, I've already started basically the cast on and a few inches into the float shawl. So you can see I'm working in the background color here. And I'm just going to knit in stockinette stitch. So the floret clusters are a derivative or a variation of stockinette stitch. So we do have a right side and a wrong side. So we need to keep that in mind. So now here's the last stitch that I have of our blue-gray, and I'm ready. I'm now moving into the pink section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a 5-stitch floret cluster. That's what it calls for in the pattern. You might find with your yarn and your gauge that you need to make a 6 or 7 stitch cluster, or maybe a 4-stitch cluster. It just it depends on how many stitches it's going to take to run through our accent color, which is why it's important to make that swatch ahead of time. You don't have to keep that swatch. You're not really measuring gauge. You're just practicing the stitch and finding out what's going to work for you. So we're to our accent color now. We're going to go into this stitch as if to knit, and instead of just wrapping it once and making a knit stitch, we're going to wrap it twice. Okay, so we've yarn over twice and pulled both of those wraps up through and off the end. So you have a double wrapped stitch right there. So that's the first one. We're going to do that 4 more times. So we're going to go in as if to knit, wrap twice, bring it through and off the end. We have number 3, number 4, and number 5. Those are 5 double wrapped stitches according to the pattern. Okay, at this point we have to change direction because we're going to try to build this entire little cluster before we move on. So we don't need to wrap and turn or anything like that. All we're going to do is turn the work over, bring the yarn back to the back again, and now we're going to slip each one of those double wrapped stitches back onto the right hand needle. And as we're doing that, we're letting go of that extra wrap. So now we have these 5 elongated stitches. You need those elongated stitches, that extra space in there, in order to work 5 stitches into those 5 stitches. Otherwise, it would be really tight and you wouldn't have room to do it. So now we have our 5 elongated stitches on the right hand needle. We're going to move those back to the left hand needle. Okay. Now we're going to take our right hand needle and we're going to knit as if we're going to knit 5 together. We're going to insert the needle into all 5 of those stitches at once. Okay. Now we're going to knit, but not slide off the end. Bring your yarn back to the front, purl into those same 5 stitches. Now we're going to bring it to the back again and knit again. Okay, now we're going to bring it to the front and purl. And now once more into the back and knit. So we've knit, purled, knit, purl, knit. That's 5 stitches into those same 5 stitches. So you decreased by 5 by knitting 5 together, but you've made 5 new stitches into it. So our stitch count is still the same. So we got rid of 5, but we added 5. So it was a net increase of 0. Okay, so now we're going to turn our work back over because we want to keep going in the same direction we started. Bring your yarn to the back again, and now because we're back on the right side of the fabric, on the knit side, we're going to knit across the top of those 5 new stitches that we just made. And by this point, we should be just about through with our pink and just about ready to transition back into the blue-gray. And we are. We've got a tiny bit of pink left on here, but it's really, the color is changing back pretty quickly to the blue-gray. And in which case, we just keep knitting. And that is how you perform a right-sided floret cluster. Now we're going to turn our work onto the back side, and on the back side, remember we're in stockinette stitch essentially, so we're going to purl across the back, and we just keep working in knits and purls on the right and wrong side until we reach an accent color again. Once your shawl grows beyond the number of stitches that I have here, you'll see that you have to perform a floret cluster 2, 3, sometimes even 4 times on a row as your rows get longer and longer. I would say that the biggest factor, the biggest determining factor of what is going to shift your pooling around or move your florets around is the stitch count per row. So in this case, we're adding a stitch on every right side row, and that is going to keep our color repeats moving. So they're not going to stack up and line up in a pattern. Okay, so we're still knitting because we're still in our background color. And we're back on the right side. So you want to worry a lot less about what you're encountering over here on the stitches that you've already worked. What you're looking for is the color changes in your working yarn. doesn't matter so much what you're coming up on. It's what color is coming along as you work. All right, we're back on the wrong side and we're just about to another pink section. So let's get one more stitch in there. Sometimes they'll fall on the edge and that's okay. Just continue as normal. We're back to our pink section again. So it's time to work our accent color in the florets. This time you'll notice that we're on the wrong side of the fabric. So you're looking at pearls. You're going to work it exactly the same way, but just switch it around as if to purl because you're on the wrong side. So we're going to purl, but wrap it twice, 5 times. Okay, so we've done that 5 times. Now the next thing we need to do, remember, is to turn it back over, and we're going to slip those stitches over to the right hand side. And the whole reason we're slipping them over again is to get rid of that extra wrap and make our elongated stitches. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we're ready to make our cluster stitches. We're going to move those, all 5 elongated stitches, back over to the left hand needle. And now this part's exactly the same. It doesn't matter if you're on the right side or the wrong side. It looks exactly the same, so don't worry about which way to work it. You're going to knit again into all 5 stitches as if to knit 5 together. Okay, I'm going to put that through all 5. We're going to knit, bring the yarn to the front and purl. I'm going to knit, purl, and knit. So we've decreased by 5, but we've added 5 back. Okay, so you can see your 5 stitches right across there. And again, we want to be going back. We started out on the wrong side, so we want to make sure that we end up on the wrong side as well. So we're going to turn things back over. And again, we're in stockinette, so we're going to purl across the back of those. And our cluster should be just about complete when we finish that 5th stitch. And you can see we are moving back into the gray color now. And we're just going to keep purling across the rest of this row. So, let's see. On the next cluster, I will show you how to perform an increase if you come to a place where an increase is needed. And it also happens to fall right during your accent color. Back on the wrong side. So it will be important to practice ahead of time so you can make sure that you're using up all of your accent color before you move on. Like I said before, sometimes you might find that you need to make fewer cluster stitches. So you might need to work four double wrap stitches and then work 4 new stitches into those elongated stitches. You might find that you need to work 6 or 7 to run through all of your yarn. If you get over 7, I would probably recommend seeing what 2 clusters of 4x4 would look like next to each other. So the thing to remember is to make sure that the number of wrap stitches that you make, the number of elongated stitches that you're working into, matches the number of stitches that you're working into them, so that your net increase is still 0. So for example, I've been showing you a 5-stitch cluster. So I worked 5 elongated stitches and I worked 5 new stitches into them. You could do the same thing with 4 stitches and 4 stitches, or 6 stitches and 6 stitches. Just make sure that those numbers match. All right, but there will be times if the floret falls on an edge where you're having to do an increase. In order to do that, so you can see we've got we're not on an edge, but I'm going to show you anyway how you would perform that. If you need to increase by 1 stitch, you would work 4 elongated stitches. In this case, we're purling them. We're going to turn it over and slip all 4 of those back off. Okay. Now if we want to increase by 1 stitch, we want to work our same 5 stitches into those 4. So we're going to knit those 4 together, purl them together, knit them together, purl them together, and knit them together one more time. So you can see we started out with 4 stitches, but we ended up with 5. So that's a net increase of 1 stitch. So if you did fall on an edge where you were needing to perform an increase, that's how you would do it. You would just work an extra stitch into that cluster, and it would work the same way. You're going to end up having a little bit more left over at the end, probably because you didn't work as many stitches, but that's okay. Assigned pooling is very fluid and very forgiving. Every skein of yarn has the potential of being different. Even ones that I've dyed, they can vary from skein to skein just because of the nature of hand-dyed yarns. That's just part of the beauty of them. The color isn't going to be as intense in some parts as it is in others. And to me, I think that adds to the beauty of the florets. I do try to build multiple colors into them so that they are multicolored flowers and not just one. It's not just a hard tone on tone. Okay, so you can see that these little clusters are very puffy, very bumpy right now, but when you block this, I want you to block it aggressively with wires and blocking mats, and that's going to make everything flatten out nicely. I can show you the original. You can see this has been blocked, and you can see the difference. It is, these little clusters definitely lay down and behave. They're still textured. They still have a little bumpiness to them, but you can see they open up quite nicely, and they're not as dense once you block it. So again, the beauty of blocking. I wanted to show you a couple of things on this one. I've gotten a lot of questions about what happens if your color doesn't run out all the way. Again, I would recommend trying a bigger cluster, but it's okay to have this little bit of an echo running after it. You can see even on my original that I did, that happens throughout. Okay, so again, this is supposed to be very kind of light and ethereal and almost like petals floating on water. You can imagine the water is shimmering. You can see the background color is a tonal color, so it's got highs and lows throughout. To me, that all just lends to the beauty of it. I'm not going for a solid flower on a solid background. I think it's a lot more interesting when you do have a little movement going on. Again, there will be times that your clusters all fall within one section. and it's okay. You just work it exactly the same way. It'll just be a nice little cluster of clusters there. And then there'll be other times that they start to really form shapes that you can recognize, and that's always kind of fun and interesting to see how they're going to end up. You can see here there's a big oval that happened here, and as you work it, you'll start to recognize different sections where it is pooling predictably. It looks very random, but it's actually very predictable because you're doing the same number of increases on the edge, and you're using the same skein that has the colors repeating at regular intervals. The last thing that I wanted to talk to you about was working into the border. Now, it's possible to work these floret clusters into a ribbing section, and basically you're going to set up your 2x2 rib as the pattern calls for, and then again, once you hit an accent color in that pattern, disregard the rib, remember which side you're on, make sure you're still working either as a knit cluster or a purl cluster on the wrong side, and just go ahead and work that little cluster. As soon as you're finished with that cluster, jump right back into your established 2x2 rib across the edge. And I just think that that's kind of a beautiful edge, seeing the florets happen even through the ribbing. And again, the directions are there as well in the pattern for binding off. And if you have to perform a floret during the bind off, that's possible too. I wanted to show you the Calico Shawl as well. It is done on a different base. This is the solo base, which is 100% merino, superwash merino single ply fingering. The float shawl was originally made with my BFL fingering. Both of them are beautiful, soft, just very relaxed looking bases to work these florets with. You can see this is the Wild Violet colorway, and I want you to notice that I just wanted to point out all of the echoing that's going on this, and that's okay. I mean, that's intentional. There are areas where the color continued, and I could have chosen to make larger clusters with it, but I actually let a little bit of that extra color bleed out away from the flowers. And so don't worry if that's happening to you. That's a common question that I've gotten quite a bit. And again, you can see the example of what the florets look like when they're built into, when they run through a 2x2 rib section. All right, well, I hope this answers everybody's questions that you've had. If you do still have further questions, please feel free to email me at chasingrabbitsfiberco@gmail.com, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. The email address is listed on your pattern. You can contact me through Ravelry or through Instagram, but I am better at seeing and answering emails in a little bit more timely fashion. So again, I hope you enjoy assigned pooling. I would love to see what you come up with. Please remember to use the tag assigned pooling, and also the whatever tag for the specific shawl that you're making, whether it's float or calico or any of the other assigned pooling projects that I've created. And feel free to play around yourself with different textures and different stitches, and create your own assigned pooling pattern. I would love to see what you create.